But we have this kicker, and every time we've ever had a kicker, there are legislators from one particular party that want to use that kicker for all sorts of...
They see dollar signs.
They see dollar signs, and this time they did, the governor did, they all wanted to use the kicker.
And they had this one slide that celebrated, they had $70 million available for EV rebates, electric infrastructure, and whatnot. And I pointed out, I said, I just want to point out that we're talking about in the building, everybody's freaking out over budget cuts to our education system, public safety. We'll be talking about all of this today. And yet on this slide right here, there's $70 million that you guys are celebrating that's going to EV infrastructure. And I know some of that's statutorily earmarked and some of that's federal funding, but that's what we do. That's what everybody forgets. That's what we do as legislators. If it's statute, we can change the statute.
We can change it.
That we can take the money from the privilege tax that goes to EV rebates and move it to roads. That
Wouldn't
right
it be
there.
great if we had a governor who would say, hey, alarm bells.
Yes.
We're losing 25,000 private sector jobs, and we have got to make changes in the incentive system or disincentive system that can keep those jobs here, or at least replace them or get incentives for growth. We don't have that, governor. And so you could be a 28-year-old healthy young guy and you're undocumented and you're getting free health care from the taxpayers of the state of Oregon. And my point to them was, when you've decided to indistinguishably pay for healthcare like that, and you've underfunded state police, that's a choice I don't agree with.
I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the...
Welcome everyone to the newest episode of the Oregon discussion on government efficiency. Now, some people just say Oregon D.O.G.E. But you know what? We're a discussion. We're not a department. We're a discussion. And we want to talk today about what happened in this week in the state capitol here in Oregon. It really had two main themes. I'm Mike McLane. I serve in the state Senate, District 30, and I'm here with my co-host, the great Representative Shelly Boshart Davis.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I guess today it's a little bit the Mike and Shelly show.
It's Mike and Shelly.
Mike and Shelly show. Shelly Boshart Davis, a state representative from the Albany area. Happy to be here, and a little bit of behind the curtain scenes on what we learned today in the Capitol and a little commentary on it. It's sad and it's shocking, and I think there's a lot to talk about.
There is, and we have with us, backed by popular demand, and I appreciate the viewers demanding extraordinary staff appearance again. Alex Lopez.
Always great to be here, Senator. Always great to be here. Happy to be back.
Alex works for Senate District 30, and he's been active in campaigns over the years. And Alex, this may be your last episode for a while.
It might be. Yeah, it might be. I'm taking a little side quest down to Texas to run a campaign down there, so I'm really excited. But I will be back in March to continue the fight here till November. So.
Yeah, I'm going to ask viewers to just not light us up. So many.
Because I'm gone.
Just because Alex Lopez is taking a break to head to Texas.
He said it on the record. You heard it here first. He's coming back.
I'll be back. Yes.
Okay.
Well, his fiance still lives here in Oregon. So
then he'll be back.
He's got to be back.
He'll be back.
He's got to be back. But we're going to talk today about two main things. The first is we had the what's called the fourth quarter, in essence, a revenue forecast. This is how the state sets its budget. And we have two sides to the ledger, as many of you know, and our state economist comes out with a forecast and says, hey, this is the amount of revenue that's going to come into the state of Oregon through our income tax on Oregonians, our lottery funds, because, you know, Oregon gets a taste of that because we run a gambling, cartel in Oregon. And, which they always say it's not for investment purposes. It's purely entertainment.
I haven't won yet.
Purely entertainment.
Is it fun not winning?
No, but
it's more fun to win.
It's thrilling. It is thrilling nonetheless.
It's more fun to win. And but we have also corporate income tax and different sources of revenue, and they estimate what that's going to be. And then And they generally do a pretty good job of estimating. It's complex macroeconomic theory and a lot of different things. And they look at Oregon's job growth and et cetera. And sometimes when the revenues produced by Oregonians through their hard work exceeds estimates by 2%, then that's called the kicker. And that comes in and the money comes back to the Oregonians who made the money, right? So their productivity is rewarded. And I think the kicker's a great idea because, trust me, it's the only thing that keeps any spending in check by a one-party state that we have, who would embarrass drunken sailors with how they spend here in Oregon. But at any event, so we had a forecast today, and we're going to go over that with you. Many of you, I know, probably turned in at 8:30 a.m. to watch the Senate and the House Revenue Committees meet and go over our revenue forecast. For those who missed it, we're going to do a quick summary today of what we learned, and we got the slides actually presented. So after we do that, then we're going to go into the second part of what the hearings are about in Salem, and that's budget cuts. Because the governor said, hey, agencies, tell me what is a 2.5% cut of your budget and what would be a 5%. So we're going to see what these agencies produce for Oregonians to look at what they would cut. And of course, we're going to show you what they don't want to cut. And then we'll let you decide what's the responsible management and stewardship of your money. So we're going to begin today.
So just one thing that you said there, thank goodness for the kicker, right? Thank goodness for the kicker. And I know there's a history behind it, and I think it's fantastic, and that Republicans made sure that was in the Constitution. It's hard to get rid of. So thank goodness for the kicker. And you made the comment that that's one way that productivity is rewarded. And I immediately thought, I was like, what other way in Oregon is productivity or success actually rewarded? And I can't think of one right away. I'll continue to try to think of it. But we talked about this many times, where it's almost like mediocrity under this agenda and this leadership in this state is mediocrity is almost the goal. And so there's something out there where productivity is actually rewarded.
Well, and it can be, as we all know, when companies do well, a lot of times they have bonus systems, et cetera. But from the standpoint of our state government, you're absolutely right. There is no reward. But we have this kicker, and every time we've ever had a kicker, there are legislators from one particular party that want to use that kicker for all sorts of...
They see dollar signs.
And this time the governor did, they all wanted to use the kicker. But they needed Republican votes because you have to have 20 in the Senate and 40 in the House to overturn, because the Constitution has a provision which, in case that the state could vote by 2/3 to overturn it. But thankfully, they didn't have the votes. So our state revenue, the last forecast we had was down. And Oregon had warning signs of a recession. Jobs were being shed by the private sector. And so it was really alarming. And everyone expected for the revenue forecast to be down even further, and we were surprised. It's not down. But there's a story behind the numbers which say, hey, don't get too excited.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'd rather have a relatively flat forecast, excluding what we think could be returned in refunds later, but then down. But the recession warning is still there. Now, here we have a slide, and we'll make sure folks can get the slide. You can get the slide off the legislative site, or we can certainly make sure it's posted by our extraordinarily great producer, Jacob. But the gross domestic product in Oregon was slowing basically to 1.6. It's firming, they believe, to about 1.9% growth in 2026. So this is certainly not something we're going to write home about, start high-fiving, but it may have reached the bottom, but it's 1.9 is what they predict, but it's 1.6 in the fourth quarter. Inflation picked up, but it's about 3%. I know the Fed's target is 2%.
Right.
For our inflation. We're at 3% in Oregon. Prior, it seemed to be 3.5%. So that was some good news. Unemployment is about changed, or a little, I should say, unchanged. They really believe it's about 5%. And they think there was an uptick. Obviously, some of the summer hirings and the like. So he said, even though the numbers say about 4.4, they think by year end, they said, really, you should think of it as 5%. So they lowered their estimate from a recession to about a 25% chance we go into recession. Now, that doesn't probably warm the heart of a lot of our viewers, but this podcast is to tell you about your government and to tell you about ways we can be more efficient. And so we're just telling you the truth. These are numbers, right? Now, what they talked about today was the tariff ruling from the Supreme Court of the United States. I want to remind you that in a lot of this information, when they talk about tariffs, these economists work for the governor of the state of Oregon, Tina Kotek, who supports the tariff lawsuits. The Attorney General of Oregon, I heard he actually did something else besides sue Trump. I'm not sure what that is, but
I don't think he did.
I don't know how many lawsuits in a row. It's just Trump, sue, sue, sue. But you can see from, again, on the next chart, the forecasts are basically looking comparative to nationally. We're doing a little less well than our sister states. And that often happens because, again, they say that demographics is destiny, and our demographics aren't great in Oregon as far as population and where, births are versus those who are passing, et cetera, net migration. So we're having some challenges. We're a little behind the country elsewhere. Go ahead, Alex. They had an interesting chart about what were the consequences of the federal government shutdown. Now, the state economist didn't talk about the shutdown of the federal government, but he did talk about some of the consequences of the delays in economic data, because during the federal shutdown, a lot of the economic data that we get was delayed because folks weren't working. But, when it comes to this shutdown, I want to remind viewers that this shutdown, people said this shutdown, that shutdown. I call it the filibuster shutdown, because the only thing that shut down the government was the filibuster in the Senate. Nobody can disagree with that.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
And the filibuster was utilized by the Democrats, who are the minority party in the U.S. Senate. One of our U.S. senators, Jeff Merkley, has told repeatedly people that he's the filibuster reformer. And in fact, if you look on his X account and some of his social media, one of his tagline is filibuster reformer. But old Jeff Merkley voted for the filibuster to shut down the government.
He used it, yeah.
He
gave a speech too, and 12-hour speech.
Sometimes he's for it, and sometimes he's against it. Somehow he rises above his principles when his partisanship suits him. So the filibuster shut down the government. As a result, we're a little behind in some of the statistics, some of the services. The filibuster shut down, and they eventually broke, right?
It was historically long, right?
It was historically long.
Yeah, it was the
43 days.
longest, in history, which is just sad. I mean, you look at the consequences of that, and that they voted how many times? 14 times to
right. So 55 out of 100. That's a majority. I don't know. When I think about democracy, right? The majority of the Senate, 55, voted to keep the government open. 45 said, no, we're going to utilize the filibuster.
14 times.
14 times. Every single time, Jeff Merkley from Oregon, the filibuster reformer, superhero, Jeff Merkley.
Yes.
So then eventually a bunch of Democrats finally said enough. They voted against the filibuster and it moved and the government opened up.
So we were able to get more statistics, is why you brought that up.
Yes,
But
right.
you brought up demographics a little bit, and you talked about children. But I just wanted to point out one thing that it was an X post this morning. Portland's population of children under 5 is down 29% since 2005. And I know we'll get into details about, taxes and revenues being down, and we'll talk about businesses leaving and our families staying here to raise a family. But I think that was shocking to me. Below or 29% down.
29% in 20
so,
years.
In 20 years. And so we're in the same kind of grouping as San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Chicago, and Portland.
Cities that are having less kids.
Cities that are having less kids. And that is
people with families are leaving the city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why you're talking
Is there a
demographics.
common element in those cities, you think?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple.
There's a couple commonalities there, but I think
All run
that
by Democrats?
They're all run by Democrats, and it's just an indication of as we're looking at some of these statistics, and the other thing that pops out to me as we're talking about, and we're going to continue on, but as we're talking about it, is it's almost like they're just happy that it's not like catastrophe. As long as it's just a level above catastrophe, it feels like there's something to celebrate. And that to me is just so sad.
Yeah,
you're right. It is. And I suppose you could argue, well, families maybe in COVID moved out. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons. But one thing it's shocking, regardless of the source or origin of that decline, is you got 29% less kids. And so we should have an episode just on demographic changes, what's happening.
That'd be
just
fun. Yeah.
Not to Oregon, but on the West Coast.
Yeah.
It's really quite alarming. So when they look at the alternative sources, non-farm, let's go to the next slide. This was interesting. When they look at new titles, there's been just a little bit of uptick. Now, I asked a question, and Oregon has been on this up and down cycle about when people title new vehicles or they register a used vehicle that they purchase, and they track that, right? And it's been declining, and then it's a little bit uptick. Now, I asked the state economists, is that because of HR1? Because for businesses, if you bought a vehicle, you can depreciate it 100% if it's related to your farm use or your business use. Or if you decided, hey, if I get a vehicle under HR1, I can deduct the interest on a car loan.
What do you say?
He said, well, we don't really have, that information. This information is more, we think, related to EV sales because of, retiring tax credits to EVs may have accelerated purchasing. So I thought, okay, so
You track that, but you don't track the other one.
you could tell, right. So what you're saying are people are smart enough to see the change in the law and go out and buy EV vehicles,
but
not smart enough to determine, oh my God, my interest could be deductible or could accelerate depreciation.
Just a side note on EV, since I can't let that go untalked about, I just came from a transportation committee literally 2 hours ago, and there was they were talking about the EVs and kind of the state of investment in electric infrastructure. And they had this one slide that celebrated, they had $70 million available for EV rebates, electric infrastructure, and whatnot. And I pointed out, I said, I just want to point out that we're talking about in the building, everybody's freaking out over budget cuts to our education system, public safety. We'll be talking about all of this today. And yet on this slide right here, there's $70 million that you guys are celebrating that's going to EV infrastructure. And I know some of that's statutorily earmarked and some of that's federal funding, but that's what we do. That's what everybody forgets. That's what we do as legislators. If it's statute, we can change the statute.
We can change it.
That we can take the money from the privilege tax that goes to EV rebates and move it to roads. Now, do you think that Oregonians expect ODOT to focus on roads?
Yes.
And in this case, $70 million going to EV rebates. I just want to mention, whether you're talking about rebates or when we use the word revenue, those are taxes.
Yeah.
Those are taxes.
Yeah, that's a fancy word for that. But but yeah, when you think the feds do it, and then Oregon jumps on too. So for those who are angry about how much their gas taxes are, when you start going down the list, to know that you're being taxed, but the state government is also giving rebates to EV buyers, along with the feds. And for a lot of people, they're saying, hey, I'm not against EVs. I'm against one group of people being preferred over another group of people in that regard. But at any event, so there's been an uptick. The wait mile, let's go to the next one. You can see transactions happening. There was a downturn when they talk about, and they tried to explain the revenue and transactions are 3-month average versus year to year versus a transaction being down. And so a lot of folks are saying, hey, when it comes to perhaps your industry and trucking, we're not confident what Oregon's going to do, so we're holding off. I don't know. I didn't know how to explain that. Next, what they call this weird trend, they call it a K-shape economy, which is in essence saying that that there are different growths and what are, in essence, incomes in Oregon, disproportionate. And they're looking at folks in what they call the first quartile versus the fourth and seeing where growth are. It's not the same. That's a little bit alarming for the long run. But again, Oregon has a different, if you will, constellation or system of incentives. And so guess what happens? People act in their self-interest. What do EV buyers do? They act in their self-interest by accelerating purchases when they know credits are going away. Well, guess what? Other people also act in their self-interest, and they begin to hold off purchases or accelerate purchases based upon tax policies. And the uncertainty in Oregon is very pronounced right now. And of course, the reputation of Oregon is not great, which we've talked about, because of its volatility in taxes and fees. And a lot of businesses are going, well, if I move here, it's not as predictable as elsewhere. We're seeing that in economic data. Next slide. Now, this is what they said. He said about the tariffs. So the state economist, again, who works for the governor, but the issue is the tariffs weren't nearly as uncertain as they predicted.
Shocking.
And that, but they're saying, hey, if the Supreme Court prevents the president from using executive authority to set tariffs, okay, then that'll produce more certainty, which will benefit Oregon. I'm looking like that, and I'm like, yeah, and baseball games get canceled in the rain, right? So it's that. I mean, I'm not sure what that really tells us, except the one data point I noticed was it's not nearly as volatile as predicted.
Well, I think I would suggest that the reason that they want to bring up anything that distracts from the chaos that's here in Oregon,
right?
And they'll point to tariffs even if it doesn't matter. They'll point to it even if they can't find a discrepancy. They just want to talk about it because they want to focus on DC as much as possible, because that's the only thing that they can do. Because they can't look at their own selves and say, I don't know, maybe it's 40 years, 20 years of Democrat rule and policies in place that have gotten us to this point. Instead, they want to point to something else, even if it doesn't matter.
In the last economic forecast, last two, that were down, the governor, presiding officers of the House and the Senate, the majority leaders in the respective caucuses, all were universal. Blame Trump, blame Trump, blame Trump. Then we had an economic forecast that flattened and ticked up a bit. What did they do? Blame Trump. But not for the positive, they just said, oh my God, uncertainty. And so there comes a point where you just say, look, you guys, I get President Trump is in office, but could we focus on what we can do here in Oregon? And of course, as you point out, when Oregon is suffering from self-inflicted government wounds, they don't want to talk about that.
No, we had. I remember even in the session, the long session that we came out of, as soon as tariffs were even talked about on a national level, we had remonstrances and speeches and everything about all these tariffs. You hadn't even seen the effects of if there was going to be any, and all they wanted to do was blame DC. All they wanted to do is blame Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're both looking at it and say, well, what about Main Street here in Oregon? You know, why aren't we focusing on this? Why are you pointing the finger? We're lawmakers. We can change things here to make it more favorable, to try to get more success here in Oregon. And instead, all they want to do is point the finger to DC. And our problems here are Oregon grown. They are Oregon grown. They are not DC grown. And I will continue to push back against that every chance I get.
Well, and let's go next slide. He says the price lag of tariffs. He tried to explain that, but at the end of the day, you know, it's based, you know, his argument is based upon a macroeconomic theory, which is, you know, a truism. But again, the data hasn't really shown up all that pronounced in Oregon. Next slide.
Did he happen to have a slide on the price tag of Biden inflation?
No.
There wasn't one?
No.
I just say, I feel like we talk about it all the time without calling it that.
Yeah.
You talk about the increased cost of the interstate bridge, right? The increased cost of building freeways, the increased cost of everything. And that's largely due to inflation.
Yeah. You remember the Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't reduce inflation and was more about green energy and other things, which Biden wanted to see happen. But again, you got to admire people who name stuff because they did quite well on that. But they have this thing called the uncertainty index, and he didn't really explain it. But apparently,
It's a nice slide.
But apparently, it's uncertainty. But as you can see, it's gone down. And
Was that due
some
to
of
Trump?
these graphs, man.
Right.
Did they say it went down because of Trump, or did?
Well, no,
No.
it just said because the tariffs did not turn out to be as bad as they thought.
Hilarious.
Interesting.
But so whatever that uncertainty index is, it as you can see in that slide, it went down considerably, and then there's just a little bit of uptick. Now, and ironic is on that same slide, you also see the federal receipts. These are revenues that are coming into the federal government as a result of the tariffs, which if you see the graph, they jump considerably. That would be considered a skyrocketing amount. And he said a 10-year difference will be $2.8 trillion. I take that to be an additional revenue from the tariffs. But I point out that the uncertainty index plummets down and the revenue goes up. So
That's wild.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's really wild.
And I was waiting for him
To
to
explain?
then so it's like a syllogism, right? You're waiting for that conclusion, right?
And then he says, next slide.
Next slide.
I think what I'll take away from that is that, again, even if that was a huge boon for the American economy, et cetera, which that's all great. Again, our problems, we are Oregon lawmakers.
Yes.
We are ones that can make a difference here in the state. And I can guarantee you, give us a little bit of power, and we can change a plethora of laws to make things better and make us top in the nation to raise a family and to get a world-class education and run a business and keep people here, right? That's what we should be focused on.
We should. And, so interesting because in the forecast for Oregon, when it looks at, hey, these revenues and we're coming in through income taxes on businesses and individuals and the like, they talk about these trends nationally and the like, but then they admit that it doesn't always, come out the way they predict in Oregon. And one of those interesting things is, when they were absolutely convinced that the tariffs were going to have this horrible impact, And then it turns out that, well, it wasn't as much. Now, I'm not here. This podcast is not to defend tariffs, right? I'm just pointing out
Yeah.
that their own charts admit it's not
Yeah.
really as bad as they thought.
Yeah.
But then they say, but next year.
Oh boy.
I mean, and after a while, I'm just like going, could we talk about Oregon?
Yeah.
Because
What can we do here?
What can we do here? And
Right.
one of the things we
Yeah.
can do is create an atmosphere that is seen as an ally to business, not an adversary. But I digress. This is unemployment. This chart shows unemployment claims in Oregon. Some ticked up. That ultimately it's not as much as they thought, which is good news.
Which is good news. But let's again caution ourselves that we call that good news, right? Oregon labor conditions cooling, not crashing. They're not crashing.
They're not crashing.
They're not
And-
crashing.
And in the trend line before was like, well, we're going to see
Good point.
folks in the summer, so we should see unemployment reduce. And then what they're saying is, since summer ended, well, there hasn't been a return. Not this crash / increases in unemployment claims. That was some good news in it, but of course, it still doesn't dissipate what are 25,000 private sector job losses. And we'll get into that. And I think right after that, they talk about, let's go ahead and go compared. These are interesting chart just about, these are anticipated when you have a WARN layoff. Excuse me. And this is when they issue warnings like Intel or Nike or bigger companies
Right.
say, hey, we're going to be laying off.
Right.
That has certainly seen an increase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen
Which
that.
means it's not showing up right now,
But yeah.
but it's going to show up starting next year.
Well, I mean, we see it in the headlines all the time. Warnings, right? There's
Right.
alert. There's
Yeah.
problems ahead, and that's a graph that just shows
Yeah.
that.
So when you look at where the jobs, you look and say, well, non-farm jobs, it was the net employment change from August 24 to August 25. But then they said, well, we're just going to show the chart on the right. It's August 25 over July 25. And then we're going to go see there wasn't nearly the reduction we thought. And I'm like, dude, the chart on the left is the one that matters,
Yeah,
which is
I don't-
what's Oregon's net employment change by industry between August 24 and August 25. Non-farm unemployment down 18,300 jobs. Manufacturing down 8,500 jobs. Trade, transportation, utilities down 7,100 jobs. Professional and business services down 5,900 jobs. Construction down 5,200 jobs. Financial activity down 1,600 jobs. And then you get to government. Government down 1,800 jobs. And this is after historic growth.
Well, this slide right here has made me, or the idea of this slide, the job loss has made me so angry over this past. I don't know. I mean, always, but this past year, there's also a statistic out there that I reference. Government jobs are up 6% since 2020. And you have manufacturing on this massive decline. In fact, they've called it a manufacturing recession. And, when we went through, it feels like everything goes back to transportation these days because it's always in the headlines and it's certainly what we've been fighting and with the referendum out there right now. But when they talked about, we needed an emergency special session to save ODOT jobs. And there's like 400, right, ODOT jobs. Very important. I mean, really, truly important. We need ODOT workers to plow roads and to keep our roads safe. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I was like, where's the outrage on the manufacturing jobs? Where's the outrage on the mill that closed down in Eastern Oregon, right? Where's this special session on the 8,500 manufacturing jobs lost?
It's a great point.
The governor
Where's
did
that
not
emergency?
It's a
call
great point. Yeah.
did not call a special session about that. And wow.
That
Wouldn't
right
it be
there.
great if we had a governor who would say, hey, alarm bells,
Yes.
we're losing 25,000 private sector jobs and we have got to make changes in
Where-
the incentive system or disincentive system that
Yeah.
can keep those jobs here or at least replace them or get incentives for growth. We don't have that, Governor.
The emergency to say, what's the root cause of this? Why are manufacturing jobs? I mean, we could talk about it. We know why they are, but these private sector jobs, why are they leaving the state? Why are they declining? Where's the outrage? That's what I want to know.
Well, it's not happening with this governor, but but as we reflected in the revenue forecasts, they tried to put a cheery note on to say, but hey, the jobs between July 25 and August 25, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, okay, and I'm like,
it was okay.
Yeah.
That's what
Not crashing,
mediocre.
right? Not
mediocre.
crashing.
Yeah,
it's not
but-
crashing.
It's not
Yeah.
crashing. Yeah,
It's not crashing.
and again, what do they call it? Liars, and statisticians, or I forget. In other words, in the stats, you can see a lot of things. But I think generally speaking, because we set our budget in Oregon by these economic forecasts, they're important.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is the recession risk down a bit, private sector jobs still declining. We just haven't, tariffs uncertain, et cetera. But status quo, but the status quo isn't great because of a long sort of history where we have not recovered. If you look, and they'll have a slide here, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. But when you look at metro areas by job creation, and you basically look and say, how did each area of the state recover from the COVID recession, decline of jobs? And if you look there, the places that are doing the best are primarily Salem, Albany, Mid-Valley, and Bend metro area, which includes, of course, Prineville, Redmond, Sisters, et cetera. And the Portland metro area is not. They've never gotten back to replace the jobs in the Portland metro area. And in fact, since February of 2023 over to February 2025, and even today, it's declining.
Yep.
So yes, they came out of the February 20, the COVID era, which came in March and et cetera, but of 2020. But the metro area is lagging behind. Some of the rural counties are about to zero. They're about to where they were, during the COVID recession. They've replaced them. But so we got some problems. We got three, in essence, areas of Oregon in the economy that we've got what they call the secondary metro areas, Albany, Bend, Corvallis, Eugene, et cetera, Salem. But then you got the Portland metro area, and then the rural area is treading water. So that's basically the three Oregon economies. Let's go to the next slide. When they looked at the Bend and Salem specifically, because they're leading the pack, and they look at what's doing great. Well, the Bend area, Central Oregon, is one of the job producers of the state. There's population increasing.
Yep.
I'm from Central Oregon. I would love to take credit for that, but obviously it's done by a lot of work by a lot of wonderful people in the private sector. You've got governments in Jefferson County and Crook County, actually the county government in Deschutes County, who have been doing great job trying to promote growth. You've got some city governments that are, a bit kind of strange, Bend being one of them, others, but ultimately that's one of the highlights of the state.
And you have to wonder what is going on in those areas. And as we're looking at some of the job losses in some of the industries, and I would say Bend's not a lot of focus on manufacturing, right? So there's going to be some places, and then you look at Salem. Salem's got a lot of government in Salem, right? It's going to be healthcare. It's going to be government. And so you look and you see, okay, well, that's why they're leading the pack. And you look at Albany, thankfully, is, a plus from Albany here. There's a lot of manufacturing in Albany. There's also a lot of healthcare. There's also education. And so you just kind of try to figure out where is that happening. And on the previous slide, we would probably have an entire podcast to try to explain why Portland Metro is struggling.
Oh my
so
gosh, yeah, the
much.
Portland Doom Loop, which we've talked about before. But I will say this: we have here two legislators, one from Albany, one from Central Oregon, in our areas of the state,
Are doing okay.
leading the state. And I
Correlation?
don't know. I'm not saying it's us, but I kind of think it's us.
Might be us.
Could be us.
Could be us.
Okay, so inflation deviation, we're seeing inflation hang in Oregon around 3%. That's how they measure it. You talk to people. Now, I understand, Shelly, that there was a podcast that is coming out. It's already been taped, where the cost of living was discussed about that.
We talked about cost of living, and really it goes back to what, not just how we see it from inside the halls of the legislature and policies that have been enacted to make this state unaffordable, whether you're talking about housing, transportation costs, gas, utilities, the cost of labor, businesses leaving the state. We talked about all of that. But also when you talk to Oregonians and you see polling and you hear from them that 67% of Oregonians think that we're on the wrong track. They think it's too expensive to live here. And then you could just name statistic after statistic of where we are in rankings to the rest of the nation, where Portland is like 80th out of 81 on real estate right now, is like commercial real estate. And so you just go down the line and you just question yourself, at what point do they say, maybe it's something we've done? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the policies that we've enacted that have gotten us to this point, and nobody's saying that.
Yeah, no.
And that's a problem.
We're saying
that. We're saying that.
The people who voters put in charge of every facet of government in this state, they don't want to talk about it because, Trump, right?
That's it. That's
Trump.
it.
But it's really an interesting thing about when you think about inflation, how they calculate it. I would say most people feel that 3%, they believe it's higher than that. But that's what our state economist
It feels
told
higher
us.
than that.
It does.
I would like a perception on inflation graph.
Versus.
Yeah.
Well,
It does feel
there's
higher,
the
for sure.
instability index. He was able to figure out how people were worried before on that, but apparently not inflation.
Some of these graphs, they just crack me up.
So he had during this presentation, what are indicators of a recession? We still have a lot of those indicators in Oregon. That's not good news, despite the uptick in revenues they predict. And this was sort of because the issue came down to estimated payments, and by those who are self-employed, and you've got corporate estimated payments, et cetera, that there are, they try to track that. And so they're not quite sure, but based upon the estimated payments, there are a lot of folks in Oregon that are saying my tax burden is not nearly as high as I thought it. I don't estimate it to be as high. Now, why not? Mm-hmm. Of course, that's the big question. And so when you try to explain it, he talked about, H.R. 1, this bill from, that was signed on July 4 of 2025. They could say, I'm going to get some tax breaks. It could be because they think those folks that run businesses, small or large, look ahead and say, my revenues are going to go down, or my revenues are going to stay the same and my costs of labor and everything else is going up, which means I'm going to have a less tax burden, so my estimates are going to be less. That's why when I walked away from this forecast today, being the vice chair of the Finance and Revenue Committee in the Senate, is I went, okay, that was the most significant said today, because what he seemed to be saying was, get ready, buckle up, because based upon estimated, these payments, choppy waters are coming in front of us. Mm-hmm. So that's the issue I saw.
The takeaway from that.
The takeaway. Anyway, so population changes because demographics are destinies. If you look where population is, Multnomah County is losing population. A lot of counties, Central Oregon is, where people are locating. Gillum County and Wheeler was, some of the smallest counties in the state. Sherman, they're seeing some population growth. But again, if you look at Lynn County, your population is increasing 1% to 2%. Marion County, 0 to 1%. But it's, Benton County has some growth. I don't know if that's related to the college. They didn't explain it. But when you look at the population, it's, when you think about the economic engine, that Portland
Right.
needs to be for us all to prosper. Well, it's just, the data is troubling.
It's interesting that, with Multnomah, it says 0%. I would love to see what that negative would be.
Yeah,
Like they
the
didn't
net,
put a
yeah.
negative 1, 2, 3, or
No,
4.
they just said less than 0.
right.
Yeah, they can't.
Oh, well, that's
Could be
why
fine.
that's
Right.
why I'm saying that. I do. It is interesting to see like what
Yeah.
that would actually be, and this is absolutely no surprise. Because of the layer of taxation alone. I mean, we
Yeah.
could talk about public safety or possibly homelessness or feeling unsafe in the area. There's a lot of reasons that people are leaving Portland and Multnomah County, but the layers of taxation. It's not just the state. I think we see that in polling, is that too many people think that taxes are too high in the state and they think it's a real problem. And then you talk about Portland, and the layers of taxation with Portland and Multnomah County are astronomical. Unless you actually look at me, you would not believe it.
Yeah, I most people don't appreciate that if you live in Portland and you pay your income tax to the federal government, just like everyone else does everywhere in the nation. But when you add in how much you pay state, county, local, metro, all these taxes, you're the second highest tax rate.
Next to Manhattan.
Yeah.
Well, next to
think-
New York City.
Yeah.
But the irony is between 400,000 combined, which means you're doing pretty well. But between 4,000, 100,000, next to 25 million, you are the highest tax rate in the nation. And then New York City kicks in. Now, maybe New York City felt threatened. They said, we're not going to be number 2 to anybody. We're going to elect a mayor.
Oh yeah,
that's gonna turn
if they
this
are number
around.
2, they're going to number 1
Yeah.
here shortly.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but those tax rates, I mean, that's the thing that we've said before. We keep saying over and over and over again. It matters.
Yeah, it
And
does.
all right, so long term demographic trend. They had some. Oregon is growing slower than the United States, and that's not good. So.
I do wonder, I hate to even bring up this buzzword, but, redistricting is, we gained a member.
Congressional seat.
Yeah, we gained a seat. It certainly changed lines. We could have an entire discussion on redistricting, certainly, but we gained a seat last time. And with the population changes, specifically in the state of Oregon in the last 5 years, I do question whether we're going to lose that.
Well, based on
Yeah, I think
a
we
bunch
will.
of
I think we will.
I think we will.
a bunch of reading, yeah, they were projected to lose the seat.
Right.
Yeah.
And so talk about, cage matches.
Oh, man.
But
I'll be there
Salinas
with the popcorn.
I sat
versus-
on the redistricting committee in the 2021 redistricting committee. So a little PTSD every time we talk about anything
Yeah.
redistricting. But let's just say congressional district 5. Do you live? You're not in 5.
I'm not
You're
in 5.
You're in 2.
I'm in 2.
I'm in 5. And if you're going to include Lynn, Marion, a little bit of Clackamas, a little bit of Lane, and Deschutes, there's
Yeah.
something wrong.
Yeah.
3
I'm just
different
gonna
states.
throw that out there.
It's basically 3 different states.
Just going to throw that out
you know?
there that is not correct.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was extremely gerrymandered.
That was extreme.
But next slide.
We segued.
So that's that wraps it. Let's just wrap up and move on to the
Yeah,
next.
sure.
But so that's the revenue forecast. It came out today, November 19, 2025. It's gonna, the forecast is guiding how we deal with budgets. That's why it's important. That's why we wanted to go over it. But the other major thing that happened in Salem this week is that we had hearings on budgets and what agency heads said, hey, if I had to reduce the budget to, say, education, public safety, or Department of Corrections or, Business Oregon, here is how I'd cut 2.5%. And then they also showed, here's how I'd cut 5%. We anticipated, the legislative branch, we're responsible for the money, that there was going to be the need driven by two major reasons. The first is that the economy was slowing, and we had to look and say, if we have to cut, where do we cut? Because our ending balance is not going to be robust. But the iceberg that the cruise liner ship of state is heading for, it comes not by the general fund, but by the federal funds, because there were a lot of reforms in how the federal government reimburses for everything from Medicaid to all sorts of things. And it's projected it could be as high as 10 billion, 11 billion, 15 billion. And so there's going to have to be adjustments. Now, those in charge of the budget from the House and Senate have said that our budget is not designed to backfill federal money. So, except we just did last night on the emergency board, take general fund money and backfill a federal budget. But that was a very political, and we won't get into that. But budgets. So when each agency was asked to produce what cuts you believe, we're going to talk about some of those cuts.
Yeah.
And it was shocking what they said they could cut and what they said we're going to keep. And as you would imagine, some agencies threw a temper tantrum and they just cut what they knew would just make people mad. Like, hell no, I'm not going to, if you're telling me I have to give back my cookie, I'm going to throw the cookie on the floor. I mean, it was a temper tantrum. Some were certainly more legitimate. But Alex, you did a little research. I know you've done it. So I want the viewers to know, if we're going to have to reform budgets, this is what the agency head, what your governor's people said that they wanted to do to make sure Oregon ran efficient. I had an agency head tell me in my committee that they are running lean. There was nowhere else to cut. They had to cut rental assistance to the elderly or things like that. And they were asked, and they said, no, we're running lean. So I started asking every agency head who would come up. I said, is your agency running lean? And guess what they all said? Absolutely. My agency is the most efficient thing on the planet.
Why would they say anything different? They've been in power and been in control and been head of the agencies for years, and the state has been flush with cash. And so they know nothing other than being fully funded. They typically get what they ask for. And so this idea of 2.5% cuts or 5% cuts, you look at what they threw out there, and it does feel like a temper tantrum. But also, we know that government is inflated. We know that it's
everyone
too big.
knows it.
Everybody knows it. And again, there's this like bubble in Salem that is like, well, I'm not. But not me. I'm like, you guys have grown. Like the budget, just look at the budget. It's grown. It's doubled in size in 10 years and quadrupled in size in 20 years. We know there's fat there somewhere. I mean, just look at the numbers. That cannot all be core function of government.
It's not. Everyone knows it. The taxpayers know it. Our viewers know it. And so now we're going to look at it and say, well, here's what the agencies had to say. So, Alex,
what they're proposing here.
What would you discover in some of the proposed cuts?
Well, for on the public safety side in the Department of the State Police, the department's largest proposed budget item to be cut is about $3.7 million for reduced services and supplies for non-mandatory training and travel. Priority 8, The reductions that will have the most significant impact on public safety are the closure of the Bend Forensic Lab, which would be about $2.2 million, the closure of the Pendleton Forensic Lab, which is about $1.2 million roughly, and then the evidence program at $2.6 million, and the drug enforcement services positions, which is about $2 million. And all of these would lead to delays in law enforcement activities and the actual reduction of OSP troopers on the streets, on the highways, as per the department notes, which I think is insane.
So this is the state police. And I stood on the floor of the Senate. We've sent this reel out, right? And I voted no on the state police budget because it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And I pointed out when I was asked by Democratic colleagues, well, where are you going to get the money? And I said, well, first of all, we have in our Oregon Health Authority budget funding Medicaid that is not reimbursed by the federal government to those who came into the United States without legal authorization, came here in Oregon, so they're undocumented. We don't get reimbursed Medicaid for them. And so you could be a 28-year-old healthy young guy and you're undocumented and you're getting free health care from the taxpayers of the state of Oregon. And my point to them was, when you've decided to indistinguishably pay for health care like that, and you've underfunded state police, that's a choice I don't agree with. And so the state police, with a budget that underfunded them, were forced to come out and say what they would do, right? And what they are saying, hey, is we're going to have to shut down forensic labs if forced to cut further.
Yeah.
And as you said, that delays processing court cases and making sure bad people who commit crimes are in jail.
Well, we've had, how many times do we have in every single session something to try to fix the backlog? This would absolutely go completely against all of those times that we're trying to fix that. Mm-hmm. But to your point about health benefits, 1.5 for the biennia 2025-27 health benefits for undocumented people, $1.5 billion, to compare that to funding for Oregon State Police, $717 million. And so you go back to whether we're talking about, core function of government, not just core function of every agency, but core function of government. And we talk about transportation. They're like, you have to make sure our roads and bridges are maintained and preserved, and that we can drive on them. They're also going to say, you can't cut public safety. You can go down the list of all these. This is asking agencies. If we were to ask people, if we were to ask Oregonians,
right,
they're going to say, make sure that we can travel on our roads, have an education system that works, and don't cut cops from our neighborhoods and from our streets. And so this is wild.
Yeah, this is, but we wanted to show it because they had to come up with just like everyone else. And so the next you got up is Department of Corrections.
And this one, I don't know, both of these are pretty crazy. This one might take the cake. The Department of Corrections is they've offered a potential cut that would lead to the closure of Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution, Oregon's third most dangerous DOC facility behind OSP and SRCI, and it houses 46.5% of the 46.5% of the EOCI inmate population are sex offenders.
So I gotta say, my staff was giving me a heads up. I was in something else, and so they were telling me about this and revenue forecast and the budget cuts, and they brought this up, and I said, you had to have gotten that wrong.
Yeah,
there's no way
that they would
that you're talking about this kind of proposal, or that this is even suggested to be on the chopping block. 46.5% of these inmate populations are sex offenders. Where would they go?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think DOC would have to house them, and because they're under judgments of conviction, so they'd probably move them to, I'm not advocating for this, but they'd move them to a different prison, which at the point of overcrowding, they'd release
a lot of other problems.
Release people who aren't sex offenders, but are theft or
It
Does it
doesn't
make
end
you-
well.
it
It
doesn't
Does it
doesn't
make
end
you?
well.
I mean, I know that in this job we get cynical. Does it make you wonder if some of these things are by design? Like you shut that one down, you move them over, and then you release a list of other people that I'm going to suggest that there's. I mean, you look at what former Governor Kate Brown and how many they have released,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it makes me feel like this is almost by design.
Yeah. I don't think Oregonians want to shut down a prison,
Yeah.
especially one that has 45% of a population of sex offenders.
And this is the point of why we do this podcast, is to just present the facts. We're not just sitting up here saying this was reported, this is in the budget, you can find it yourself, of the proposed agency cuts. And like you said, Representative Davis, when I saw it, I was like, wait, well, I had to reread it.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're going nuclear.
So that is nuclear, and I'm going to take the first point to this slide.
Yeah.
In my world, that's nuclear.
So this
Yeah.
is a
That
Department
number
of
point,
Education.
that first point is nuclear.
K-12 budget.
Yeah,
So
K-12 budget.
this
Segue into
this
it.
is called a tantrum. So what the Department of Education said is, well, the first thing we're going to do is
Cut FFA.
cut FFA.
Cut FFA.
Yeah.
You know, I was reading about this specifically because I got a heads up on this one particularly a couple days ago. And in kind of the explanation of what FFA is, it called it, and I don't have the words in front of me, but it called it the best leadership program we have in the state of Oregon.
Yes.
And
it's the first thing. It's literally like the first
like
thing.
you know what? I'm going to give you the microphone for a second because I want you to tell the listeners who your wife is.
My wife was the first female state president of Future Farmers of America in the state of Oregon in the history. In the history. I married
Holly,
up.
that's incredible.
To
you
you,
married
Holly.
up, and we all acknowledge that.
And don't you have a daughter currently in FFA?
I do have, so I have 3 daughters, 23, 20, and 18. They all did FFA. And my baby, my senior, Sam, is currently in FFA. She's the district president and she's the chapter president. And she lives and breathes FFA. And that program, if I'm looking at a resume for somebody who has done FFA in the past, you already know that they have this litmus of work that they've done. They are incredible students.
Incredible
they go on to do
students.
amazing things.
Why would you? I mean, that's the first thing out of the block, Department of Education, seriously.
Yeah, and you almost don't even believe it. You look at it and whether you say temper tantrum or you say that's never going to happen, but I almost feel like they want to leverage that, right? They're like, we know that legislators like McLane and Boshart Davis, they're going to do anything to make sure that doesn't happen because they know how important that is. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're misconstruing what they're seeing. We're looking at it and we're like, don't you dare. If you want to have the biggest grassroots upheaval, maybe second to the transportation referral, but if you want to have that kind of grassroots, uprising, go ahead and continue to throw that out there.
A picture of, from Dukes of Hazzard back in the day, a boss hog there with the cigar going, well, there's a way we could keep FFA open. We just need to maybe increase a little taxes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We just need more taxes.
Right.
We need to. I mean, they did that with wolf deprivation, right? They found it. They found a revenue stream.
Yeah.
They found a revenue stream.
We'll be happy to increase compensation for ranchers who lose cattle to wolves. Just give us new taxes.
We'll just tax yours in.
And I wanted to put this example too, kind of as a contrast, right? We see the FFA numbers up there. That's about 1.7 million and change that they're wanting to cut. And I wanted to compare that to, there's some other services out there, that might not, they're definitely not as important, at least in my opinion, to compare to the FFA. And the extension service for OSU, they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program that is not on the chopping block currently. It's still an ongoing program, and it's about $540,000 and some change. It's about two positions. And then we've also got an ag industry labor standards study at PSU, current program ongoing, not on the chopping block, that has about $666,000. So
So I've got a question for you. The $809,000 for FFA, is that just the part of FFA that's on the chopping block, or what does the $800,000 represent? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think those are all different. Those are all different points.
Okay.
It's not just
And
the
my
one
guess is
overall.
it's just what they pay for the state advisor or whatever they
Right.
do for
It's cuts,
support of the
it's cuts to
programs.
part of the program.
Right.
Okay, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
exactly.
But if you
Yeah.
compare that to DEI and the Extension Service, I'm telling you right now, I work with OSU Extension Service on a multitude of different
Right.
things. They don't need a DEI to the tune of $500,000.
No.
I'm telling you right now.
The extension service is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But for goodness sakes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying I've interviewed people who work in extension service, except I know a lot of people who have worked and do work. But if you ask them, would you rather have your DEI program continued in extension service or have FFA?
Get cut.
They would
yeah.
all say keep
100%.
FFA.
100%.
I mean, that's what they're about.
You know, I think this is the third time I've said it, even on this podcast alone. But if you put this out to Oregonians, it's going to be. I think they talk about an 80-20 issue. This is not that. This is
Yeah.
like a 97-3.
Yeah, it's a.
Yeah.
So clearly, the department. I mean, we're showing this because agriculture is very important to our districts and you and I personally. And but you know, when I first saw that, I just thought that's ridiculous. So natural resources, what's happening in there?
Yeah, so program areas and potential cuts. The Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Division, about $3.3 million. And the biggest of the potential cuts that the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department is proposing is the reduction of the Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Division to enforce fish, wildlife, and commercial fishing laws. This cut would result in a loss of 8 positions roughly and would hurt the agency's effort to manage our wildlife. And the big question, right, that is, would be posed this is, why is ODFW choosing to invest in climate change initiatives like Natural Climate Solutions, which is non-core mission, but choosing to cut Oregon State Police, which helps enforce wildlife management?
Well, I know why.
I know why. Because
I know why. It's
Tina
an
Kotek
agenda.
is governor, and to me, I just sit back and I think, so the Fish and Wildlife division. So fish, that department is saying we'll cut troopers, our funding for the troopers to enforce, the hunting regulations and fishings and everything that, frankly, those of us who hunt and fish want enforced, right? Because we don't want poachers.
We want
right?
we want the
Yeah.
laws, maintained and
Right.
enforced.
And they're saying, no, we'll keep our climate change programs and cut that.
I think this goes to show, though, when you say this is, and again, this is what we're just telling Oregon, this is what the agencies have proposed,
Yes,
right?
Proposed,
Exactly.
right.
And this wouldn't be
Thankfully,
what we would
not
propose.
law yet.
Thankfully, not law yet, but it goes back to I don't know if they got a lot of parameters around this is what you should be, because you brought it up, non-core mission.
Mm-hmm.
You're cutting the core mission part of it. You're actually managing wildlife, but you're choosing to keep investments and again taxes and revenue taxes into non-core missions.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that right there should just be a no-go. We should switch that. I don't know how this is going to be moved forward.
If you were an agency and you were saying, how do I make rural legislators agitated?
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a good
Yeah,
job.
doing a good job.
It's a playbook of it. And
It's a playbook.
we're talking about the climate protection program areas, potential cuts. In 2025, the legislature authorized the hiring of 3 permanent full-time positions using $1.1 million from the general fund for the climate protection program. So that, that's just another thing that's not on the chopping block. And we approved in the long session, or you guys didn't.
But I'm pretty sure
know.
we did not.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys didn't.
We
but
did not.
the Democrats in the legislature did. And in the list of the proposed cuts, also, DEQ proposed cutting $222,000 from the climate protection program. However, there's $877,000 also allocated to the same program. So what are we? You're just going to take a little bit, but you still already, had a lot more money approved for it. So it's It's politics, right?
Right. It's politics. There's
So-
a lot of politics in the budget.
Right.
You know, we want to talk about how to make us lean and mean, fighting machines, so to speak, in Oregon, and how to be robust and generating revenue and getting back to core mission instead of this mission creep that has gone on in Oregon. And so the first time, right, since 2011, you know, not that it's been enacted, they were just tell us what you would recommend cutting. What we're seeing is our agencies and directors of these agencies coming forth with stuff like this.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think the probability of these being enacted? I would say it's very close to zero. I look at it and what a waste of time and energy and money, because what's going to happen is not this.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be this.
Well, I can't
and so it's
imagine
almost
you
like
get
this exercise that's never going to happen.
Like if you literally came into 2026 session and said, hey, we're gonna reduce these budgets, and you put on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate cuts that include getting rid of FFA, you're going to get no Republicans to vote for it.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few Democrats that are never going to vote for this either.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of FFA chapters in their district.
Either that or they at least appreciate it
Yeah.
and realize what it does for the future of both agriculture and
Yeah.
Oregon.
Right.
Yeah, no. And lastly, Department of Administrative Services. I want to talk about this one first, and it's state employee raises. So this committee is to accept a report, on increased costs for state employees from Department of Administrative Services that will total hundreds of millions of dollars over the next couple of years, where they're so essentially, the state employee raises. We're just going to keep making. They're just going to keep making more money, and it's not even a discussion. It hasn't
Right.
been.
The governor signed it, and the legislature has no choice but
Hands
to fund
off.
it.
Correct.
Yep,
Weird.
exactly.
Right. But
So-
that's the truth.
That's the truth. And then cybersecurity versus DEI. Why did Department of Administrative Services prioritize cutting cybersecurity positions and services such as the information systems specialist, analyst, and IT professionals over further reducing funding for the Strategic Initiatives and Enterprise Accountability Office, which leads enterprise accountability and cultural change, including diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts, budgeted at about $7.5 million, and it has about 15 positions. So the agency's proposing to cut cybersecurity positions before recommending that they cut DEI positions, which this has been a theme of the long session too, right? We saw that and them wanting to fund more of those positions. That to me is a no-brainer, but yet again,
We're seeing it over and over again.
I didn't realize first two things I didn't realize. Thank you for this research, Alex. Not only is it to me, I mean, DAS is like the backbone of how everything runs on its administrative service. They're the ones that, to make sure we have cybersecurity, so our systems aren't hacked, our DMV information is not hacked. And that's a long story about how they sell some of it. But at any event, so they're saying here's a cut, cybersecurity, but we're not cutting DEI. And then they throw in belonging.
And belonging.
yeah,
belonging.
they kind of just put that
Belonging.
one
Is
on
that is that a new word? I mean,
I haven't heard it yet.
I must
I saw
admit,
that
I
for the
haven't
first
been
time.
trained on that.
Belonging.
Belonging is a new.
In your cubicle.
So DEI is now DEEB.
DEIB.
Yeah.
Deeb.
Parentheses.
So this state employee raises that you brought up the first time, I'll go to point out, and it happened really quietly, but in the short or in the long session where everything's transportation, and making sure that we keep these jobs, and we need $300 more million in order to fund we heard this over and over and over again. What we didn't hear is in that same biennia, there was I think it was $92 million in approved raises. And we don't have a choice over that. That is collectively bargained.
Right.
And it just happens. And so I just think to myself, these ODOT employees are up in arms, and they don't want to lose. I don't want them to lose their jobs either.
Yeah, of course.
Especially those that are, again, we were talking about maintaining roads and bridges and keeping our roads plowed and everything else. If they had the choice of getting a 5% COLA versus not losing their job or having their, brother ODOT lose their job, I have to think they would choose that. And that isn't even an option, and it should be.
Well, and the governor sits across the table from public employee unions, who are her biggest campaign donors.
Fit the bill.
Donors.
And she negotiates tough on behalf of the taxpayers of Oregon.
Yep.
And but it shocks me. I mean, viewers, right? Let's ask you. Do you want to cut cybersecurity for the state government, or DEI and belonging programs? Now, and here's the irony: whether you're for or against DEI training, right? It's not the first time we've done it. We've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah. We've been talking about it for quite a while,
And so I'm kind of thinking maybe after 10, 12, 14 years, I don't know how many years in a row we've had a robust budget for this training, right? And now in this next year, 2, they're saying that we're going to underfund cybersecurity so we can continue for the umpteenth year training folks on DEI and apparently now belonging. And I just think this can't be. People should know about this.
Yeah, that's why we do it.
That's why we have this podcast, to let you know what's happening in your state government with your tax dollars. Is this a choice that you'd make? It's not the choice I'd make.
I'm looking up at that paragraph up there, and I'm like counting the buzzwords up there, in there, the, accountability, cultural change, belonging, DEI. And I think to myself, leads, enterprise accountability, and cultural change. How long do we have to lead on cultural change before there's change? Like you said, 10 years. Like at some point, either what you're doing isn't working, or maybe I'm just going to suggest it's not necessary, because either you're not doing a good job of it.
I know
how much money do you have to spend?
Look, I know one thing is, when you think about this coming year in state government, cybersecurity is damn important.
Of course.
It's got to be top.
AI systems
top.
and et cetera. And you're telling me that was the DAS?
Here we go.
That was their choice.
Yeah.
So, again, to me, this is a non-starter. I would never support this.
If Governor Kotek doesn't look at all of this and literally does a Nancy Pelosi and tears it up and throws it in the trash and say, "Are you kidding me?"
You'd have to fire some people for putting stuff out like that, right?
This is wild.
This is what we're going.
This is wild. The only choice is to tear this up, which is also, a waste of taxpayer money to do this entire
the dance, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, exactly. I just can't believe, as a taxpayer, so you're telling me that $7.5 million pays for 15 people at the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office at DEA?
My guess is it also pays for a lot of contractors they hire.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Which, by the way, I watched that Matt Walsh special.
Oh, did you?
Am I a racist? And he went out and interviewed people who did training.
Like that work.
Yeah. And it's a hilarious show. But anyway, for those who haven't seen it, it's you should watch it, because there is this ecosystem of contractors that do a lot of this training. And you first think it's a parody, right? You're watching a comedy, a parody, and then you realize, oh my God, these contractors are dead serious, and this is how they make money. This is their livelihood, and you just think, oh my God, the emperor has no clothes. I mean, but for folks watching today, we wanted to give you the forecast and then talk about some of the changes to the budget that are being proposed, not by us, not by Republicans, not by downstate Democrats. All right, they're being proposed by, your state agencies, as to what they would cut. You see their priorities. Are these your priorities? Let us know. And I think that's it for today, right? No more slides?
No, the only last thing is I want to give a shout out to the SRO and the HRO who actually put together all of this stuff that I was then able to go in and kind of pick out some of the more alarming and scary things that we presented here tonight. So shout out to the SRO and the HRO. Thanks, guys.
They're fantastic.
Yeah.
I just think that if in closing, we look at all of this, we can change this around.
Yeah.
Like there is an
can
opportunity to change this. And when we look at how we can stimulate the economy and how we can do better in the state and change course, there are options. We have elections coming up, and to the viewers, if you are shocked by this, or maybe you're not shocked by this and you're like, yeah, this state sucks. Well, we can do something about it. And we're seeing, grassroots across the state really push back. And so I hope that continues into this next year and say there are better ways that we can raise a family, run a business, stay in this state, because it's a beautiful state. It's an amazing state. And the people in Oregon are incredible. And I think we have an opportunity to make changes where we don't have to make fun of the state budget.
Yes. Amen.
Perfect closing. We'll see you next time.